Chapter 4. Random and Flora were waiting in my quarters when I returned. Random's eyes went first to the pendant, then to my own. I nodded. I turned toward Flora, bowing slightly. "Sister," I said, "it has been a while and then a while." She looked somewhat frightened, which was all to the good. She smiled and took my hand, though.
"Brother," she said, "I see that you have kept your word."
Pale gold, her hair. She had cut it, but retained the bangs. I could not decide whether I liked it that way or not. She had very lovely hair. Blue eyes, too, and tons of vanity to keep everything in her favorite perspective. At times, she seemed to behave quite stupidly, but then there are other times that I have wondered. Excuse me for staring," I said, "but the last time that we met I was unable to see you."
I am very happy that the situation has been corrected," she said. "There was nothing I could do, you know."
"I know," I said, recalling the occasional lilt of her laughter from the other side of the darkness on one of the anniversaries of the event. "I know." I moved to the window and opened it, knowing that the rain would not be coming in. I liked the smell of a storm. "Random, did you learn anything of interest with regard to a possible postman?" I asked. "Not really," he said. "I made some inquiries. No one seems to have seen anyone else in the right place at the right time." "I see," I said. "Thank you. I may see you again later." "All right," he said. "I'll be in my quarters all evening, then." I nodded, turned, leaned back against the sill, and watched Flora. Random closed the door quietly as he left. I listened to the rain for half a minute or so.
"What are you going to do with me?" she said finally.
"Do?"
"You're in a position to call for a settlement on old debts. I assume that things are about to begin."
"Perhaps," I said. "Most things depend on other things. This thing is no different."
"What do you mean?"
"Give me what I want, and we'll see. I have even known to be a nice guy on occasion."
"What is it that you want?"
"The story, Flora. Let's start with that. Of how you came to be my shepherdess there on that shadow earth. All pertinent details. What was the arrangement? What was the understanding? Everything. That's all." She sighed.
"The beginning."
"Yes," she said.
"Yes. It was in Paris, a party, at a certain Monsieur Foucault's. This was about 3 years before the terror—"
"Stop," I said. "What were you doing there?"
"I had been in that general area of shadow for approximately 5 of their years," she said. "I had been wandering, looking for something novel, something that suited my fancy. I came upon that place at the time, in the same way that we find anything. I let my desires lead me, and I followed my instincts."
"A peculiar coincidence."
"Not in light of all the time involved, and considering the amount of travel in which we indulge. It was, if you like, my Avalon, my amber surrogate, my home away from home. Call it what you will. I was there, at that party, that October night, when you came in with the little red-headed girl, Jacqueline, I believe was her name."
That brought it back, from quite a distance. A memory I hadn't called for a long, long while. I remembered Jacqueline far better than I did Foucault's party, but there had been such an occasion. "Go ahead."
"As I said," she went on, "I was there. You arrived later. You caught my attention immediately, of course. Still, if one exists for a sufficiently long period of time and travels considerably, one does occasionally encounter a person greatly resembling someone else that one has known. And that was my first thought after the initial excitement faded. Surely it had to be a double. So much time had passed without a whisper. Yet we all have secrets and good reasons for hiding them. This could be one of yours. So I saw that we were introduced, and then had a devil of a time getting you away from that little red-headed piece for more than a few minutes. And you insisted that your name was Finival, Cordell Finival. I grew uncertain. I could not tell whether it was a double or you playing games. The third possibility did cross my mind, though, that you had dwelled in some adjacent area of shadow for a sufficient time to cast shadows of yourself. I might have departed still wondering had not Jacqueline later boasted to me concerning your strength. Now, this is not the commonest subject of conversation for a woman, and the way in which she said it led me to believe that she had actually been quite impressed by some of the things you had done. I drew her out a bit and realized that they were all of them feats of which you were capable. That eliminated the notion of it being a double. It had to be either you or your shadow. This in mind, even if Cordell was not Corwin, he was a clue that you were or had been in that shady neighborhood. The first real clue I had come across concerning your whereabouts. I had to pursue it. I began keeping track of you then, checking into your past. The more people I questioned, the more puzzling it became. In fact, after several months, I was still unable to decide. There were enough smudgy areas to make it possible. Things were resolved for me the following summer, though, when I revisited Amber for a time. I mentioned the peculiar affair to Eric.
Yes?
Well, he was somewhat aware of the possibility. She paused and rearranged her gloves on the seat beside her.
Uh-huh, I said. And just what did he tell you?
That it might be the real you, she said. He told me there had been an accident.
Really?
Well, no, she admitted. Not an accident. He said that there had been a fight and he had injured you. He thought you were going to die and he did not want the blame, so he transported you off into shadow and left you there, in that place. After a long while, he decided that you must be dead, and that it was finally all over between you. My news naturally disturbed him, so he swore me to secrecy and sent me back to keep you under surveillance. I had a good excuse for being there, as I'd already told everyone how much I liked the place.
You didn't promise to keep silent for nothing, Flora. What did he give you?
He gave me his word that should he ever come into power here in Amber, I would not be forgotten.
A little risky, I said. After all, that would still leave you with something on him. Knowledge of the whereabouts of a rival claimant, and of his part in putting him there.
True, but things were sort of balanced out. And I would have to admit to have becoming an accomplice. And I would have to admit having become an accomplice in order to talk about it.
I nodded. Tight, but not impossible, I agreed. But did you think he would let me continue living if he ever did get a chance at the throne?
That was never discussed. Never.
It must have crossed your mind, though.
Yes, later, she said. And I decided he would probably do nothing. After all, it was beginning to seem likely that you had been deprived of your memory. There was no reason to do anything to you so long as you were harmless.
And so you stayed on to watch me, to see that I remained harmless.
Yes.
And what would you have done if I had shown signs of recovering my memory? She looked at me and then looked away.
I would have reported it to Eric.
And what would he have done then?
I don't know.
I laughed a little and she blushed. I could not remember the last time I had seen Flora blush. I will not belabor the obvious, I said. All right, you stayed on, you watched me. What next? What happened?
Nothing special. You just went on leading your life, and I went on keeping track of it.
All the others knew where you were?
Yes, I'd made no secret of my whereabouts. In fact, all of them came around to visit me at one time or another.
That includes random? She curled her lip.
Yes, several times, she said.
Why the sneer?
"It is too late to start pretending that I like him," she said. "You know, I just don't like the people he associates with. Assorted criminals, jazz musicians. I had to show him family courtesy when he was visiting my shadow, but he put a big strain on my nerves. Bringing those people around at all hours, jam sessions, poker parties. The place usually reeked for weeks afterwards, and I was always glad to see him go. Sorry. I know you like him, but you wanted the truth."
He offended your delicate sensibilities. Okay. I now direct your attention to the brief time when I was your guest. Random joined us rather abruptly. Pursuing him were half a dozen nasty fellows whom we dispatched in your living room.
I recall the event quite vividly.
Do you recall the guys responsible, the creatures we had to deal with?
Yes.
Sufficiently well to recognize one if you ever saw another?
I think so.
Good. Have you ever seen one before?
No.
Since?
No.
Have you ever heard them described anywhere?
Not that I can remember. Why?
I shook my head. Not yet. This is my inquisition, remember? Now I want you to think back for a time before that evening. Back to the event that put me in Greenwood. Maybe even a little earlier. What happened? And how did you find out about it? What were the circumstances? What was your part in things?
Yes, she said. I knew you would ask me that sooner or later. What happened was that Eric contacted me the day after it occurred, from Amber via my trump.
She glanced at me again, obviously to see how I was taking it, to study my reactions. I remained expressionless.
He told me that you had been in a bad accident the previous evening, and that you were hospitalized. He told me to have you transferred to a private place, one where I could have more say as to the course of your treatment.
In other words, he wanted me to stay a vegetable.
He wanted them to keep you sedated.
Did he or did he not admit to being responsible for the accident?
He did not say that he had had someone shoot out your tire, but he did know that that was what had happened. How else could he have known? When I learned later that he was planning to take the throne, I assumed that he had decided finally it was best to remove you entirely. When the attempt failed, it seemed logical that he would do the next most effective thing. See that you were kept out of the way until after the coronation.
I was not aware that the tire had been shot out, I said. Her face changed, and she recovered.
You told me you knew it was not an accident, that someone had tried to kill you. I assumed you were aware of the specifics.
I was treading on slightly mucky ground again for the first time in a long while. I still had a bit of amnesia, and I decided I probably always would. My memories of the few days prior to the accident were still spotty. The pattern had restored the lost memories of my entire life up until then, but the trauma appears to have destroyed recollection of some of the events immediately preceding it. Not an uncommon occurrence. Organic damage, rather than simple functional distress, most likely. I was happy enough to have all the rest back, so those did not seem especially lamentable. As to the accident itself, and my feelings that it may have been more than an accident, I did recall the gunshots. There had been 2 of them. I might even have glimpsed the figure with the rifle, fleetingly, too late. Or perhaps that was pure fantasy. It seemed that I had, though. I had something like that in mind when I headed out for Westchester. Even at this time, though, when I held power in Amber, I was loath to admit to this single deficiency. I had faked my way with Flora before with a lot less to go on. I decided to stick with a winning combination. I was in no position to get out and see what had been hit, I said. I heard the shots. I lost control. I assumed that it was a tire, but I never knew for sure. The only reason I raised the question was because I was curious as to how you knew it was a tire.
I already told you that Eric told me about it.
It was the way you said it that bothered me. You made it sound as if you knew all the details before he contacted you. She shook her head.
Then pardon my syntax, she said. That sometimes happens when you look at things after the fact. I'm going to have to deny what you are implying. I had nothing to do with it, and I had no prior knowledge that it had occurred.
Since Eric is no longer around to confirm or deny anything, we will simply have to let it go, I said. For now. And I said it to make her look even harder to her defense, to direct her attention away from any possible slip, either in word or expression, from which she might infer the small flaw which still existed in my memory. Did you later become aware of the identity of the person with the gun? I asked.
Never, she said. Most likely some hired thug. I don't know.
Have you any idea how long I was unconscious before someone found me, took me to a hospital? She shook her head again. Something was bothering me, and I could not quite put my finger on it. Did Eric say what time I had been taken into the hospital?
No.
When I was with you, why did you try walking back to Amber rather than using Eric's trump?
I couldn't raise him.
You could have called someone else to bring you through, I said. Flora, I think you are lying to me. It was really only a test to observe her reaction. Why not?
About what? She asked. I couldn't raise anyone else. They were all otherwise occupied. Is that what you mean?
She studied me. I raised my arm and pointed at her, and the lightning flashed at my back just outside the window. I felt a tinkle, a mild jolt. The thunderclap was also impressive. You sinned by omission, I tried. She covered with her face with her hands and began to weep.
I don't know what you mean, she said. I answered all your questions. What do you want? I don't know where you were going, or who shot at you, or what time it occurred. I just know the facts I've given you, damn it!
She was either sincere or unbreakable by these means, I decided. Whichever, I was wasting my time and could get nothing more this way. Also, I'd better switch us away from the accident before she began thinking too much about its importance to me. If there was something there that I was missing, I wanted to find it first. Come with me, I said.
Where are we going?
I have something I want you to identify. I will tell you why after you see it. She rose and followed me. I took her up the hall to see the body before I gave her the story on Cain. She regarded the corpse quite dispassionately. She nodded.
Yes, she said, and even if I did not know it, I would be glad to say that I did, for you.
I grunted a non-committal. Family loyalty always touches me, somewhere. I could not tell whether she believed what I had said about Cain, but things sort of equal to equal things sort of being equal to each other, I didn't much seem to matter. I did not tell her anything about Brand, and she did not seem to possess any new information concerning him. Her only other comment, when everything I'd had to say was said, was,
You wear the jewel well. What about the headpiece?
It is too soon to talk about such things, I told her.
Whatever my support may be worth.
I know, I said, I know. My tomb is a quiet place. It stands alone at a rocky declivity, shielded from 3 sides against the elements, surrounded by transported soil, wherein a pair of scrubby trees, miscellaneous shrubs, weeds, and great ropes of mountain ivy are rooted, about 2 miles down and back of the crest of Culvier. It is a long, low building with benches in front, and the ivy was contrived to cover it to a great extent, mercifully masking most of a bombastic statement graven on its face beneath my name. It is, understandably, vacant most of the time. That evening, however, Ganelon and I repaired thither, accompanied by a good supply of wine and some wool loaves and cold cuts. "You weren't joking," he said, having dismounted, crossed over, and parted the ivy, able to read by the moon's light the words that were rendered there. "Of course not," I said, climbing down and taking charge of the horses. "It's mine, all right." Tethering our mounts to a nearby shrub, I unslung our bags of provisions and carried them to the nearest bench. Ganelon joined me as I opened the first bottle and poured us a dark, deep pear. "I still don't understand," he said, accepting his. "What's there to understand? I'm dead and buried there," I said. "It's my cenotaph, is what it is. The monument that gets set up when the body has not been recovered. I only just learned about mine recently. It was raised several centuries ago when it was decided that I wasn't coming back." "Kind of spooky," he said. "What's inside, then?" "Nothing. Though they did thoughtfully provide a niche in a casket just in case my remains put in an appearance. You cover both bets that way." Ganelon made himself a sandwich. "And whose idea was it?" he asked. "Random thinks it was Bran's or Eric's. No one remembers for sure. They all seemed to feel it was a good idea at the time." He chuckled, an evil noise that perfectly suited his creased, scarred, and red-bearded self. "What's to become of it now?" I shrugged. "I suppose some of them think it's a shame to waste it this way and would like to see me fill it. In the meantime, though, it's a good place to come and get drunk. I hadn't really paid my respects yet." I put together a pair of sandwiches and ate them both. This was the first real breather I had had since my return, and perhaps the last for some time to come. It was impossible to say, but I had not really had a chance to speak with Ganelon at any length during the past week, and he was one of the few persons I trusted. I wanted to tell him everything. I had to. I had to talk with someone who was not a part of it in the same way as the rest of us, and so I did. The moon moved a considerable distance, and the shards of broken glass multiplied within my crypt. "And so how did the others take it?" he asked me. "Predictably," I answered. "I could tell that Julian did not believe a word of it, even though he said that he did. He knows how I feel about him, and he is in no position to challenge me. I don't think Benedict believes me either, but he is a lot harder to read. He is biding his time, and I hope giving me the benefit of the doubt while he is about it. As for Gerard, I have the feeling that this was the final weight, and whatever trust he had left for me has just collapsed. Still, he'll be returning to Amber early tomorrow, to accompany me to the grove to recover Kane's body. No sense in turning it into a safari, but I did want another family member present. Deirdre now, she seemed happy about it. Didn't believe a word, I'm sure. But no matter, she has always been on my side, and she has never liked Kane. I'd say she is glad that I seem to be consolidating my position. I can't really tell whether Luella believed me or not. She doesn't much give a damn about what the rest of us do to one another, so far as I can see. As to Fiona, she simply seemed amused at the whole business. But then she has always had this detached, superior way of regarding things. You can never be certain what represents her real thinking. Did you tell them the business about Brand yet? No, I told them about Kane, and I told them I wanted them all to be in Amber by tomorrow evening. That is when the subject of Bran will be raised. I have an idea I want to try out. You contacted all of them by means of the Trumps? That's right. There was something I've been meaning to ask you about that. Back on the Shadow World we visited to obtain the weapons, there were telephones. Yes? I learned about wiretaps and such while we were there. Is it possible, do you think, that the Trumps could be bugged? I began to laugh and then caught myself as some of the implications of his suggestion sank in. Finally, I don't really know, I said. So much concerning Dworkin's work remains a mystery. The thought just never occurred to me. I've never tried it myself. I wonder, though. Do you know how many sets there are? Well, everyone in the family has a pack or two, and there are a dozen or so spares in the library. I don't really know whether there are any others, and it seems to me that a lot could be learned just by listening in. Oh, I don't really know whether there are any others.
It seems to me that that a lot could be learned just by listening in. Sorry.
Yes. Dad's deck, brands, my original pack, the one random lost. Hell, there are quite a number unaccounted for these days. I don't know what to do about it. Start an inventory and try some experiments, I guess. Thanks for mentioning it. He nodded, and we both sipped for a while in silence. Then,
What are we going to do, Corbin?
about what?
About everything. What do we attack now? And in what order?
My original intention was to begin tracing the Black Road towards its origin as soon as things were more settled here in Amber, I said. Now, though, I have shifted my priorities. I want Brand returned as soon as possible, if he is still living. If not, I want to find out what happened to him.
But will the enemy give you the breathing time? He might be preparing a new offensive right now.
Yes, of course. I've considered that. I feel we have some time, since they were defeated so recently. They will have to pull themselves together again, beef up their forces, reassess the situation in light of our new weapons. What I have in mind for the moment is to establish a series of lookout stations along the road to give us advance warning of any new movements on their part. Benedict has already agreed to take charge of the operation.
I wonder how much time we have.
I poured him another drink, as it was the only answer I could think of.
Things were never this complicated back in Avalon. Our Avalon, I mean.
True, I said. You're not the only one who misses those days. At least, they seem simpler now. He nodded. I offered him a cigarette, but he declined in favor of his pipe. In the flame-light, he studied the jewel of judgment, which still hung about my neck.
You say you can really control the weather with that thing? He asked.
Yes, I said.
How do you know?
I've tried it, and it works.
What did you do?
That storm this afternoon. It was mine.
I wonder.
What?
I wonder what I would have done with that sort of power. What I would do with it.
The first thing that crossed my mind, I said, slapping the wall of my tomb, was to destroy this place by lightning. Strike it repeatedly and reduce it to rubble. Leave no doubt in anyone's mind as to my feelings, my power.
Why didn't you?
Got to thinking about it a bit more. Decided, hell, they might really have a use for this place before too long if I'm not smart enough or tough enough or lucky enough. Such being the case, I decided to where I would like. I just tried to decide where I'd like them to dump my bones. It caught me then that this was really a pretty good spot, up high, clean, where the elements still walk naked. Nothing in sight but rock and sky. Stars, clouds, sun, moon, wind, rain. Better company than a lot of other stiffs. Don't know why I should have to lie beside anyone I wouldn't want next to me now. And there aren't many.
You're getting morbid, Corbin.
Or drunk.
Or both. Bitter, too. You don't need that.
Who the hell are you to say what I need? I felt him stiffen beside me and then relax.
I don't know, he finally said.
Just saying what I see. How are the troops holding up? I asked.
I think they are still bewildered, Corbin. They came to fight a holy war on the slopes of heaven. They think that's what the shooting was all about last week. So they are happy on that account, seeing as we won. But now this waiting in the city, they just don't understand the place. Some of the ones they thought to be enemies are now friends. They are confused. They know they are being kept ready for combat, but they have no idea against whom or when. As they have been restricted to the billets the whole time, they have not yet realized the extent to which their presence is resented by the regulars and the population at large. They will probably be catching on fairly soon, though. I'd been waiting to raise the subject, but you've been so busy lately. I sat smoking for a time. Then, I guess I'd better have a talk with them, I said.
I won't have a chance tomorrow, though, and something should be done soon. I think they should be moved to a bivouac area in the Forest of Arden. Tomorrow, yes. I'll locate it for you on the map when we get back. And tell them it is to keep them close to the Black Road. Tell them that another attack could come that way at any time, which is no less than the truth. Drill them, maintain their fighting edge. I'll come down as soon as I can and talk to them.
That will leave you without a personal force in Amber.
True. It may prove a useful risk, though, both as a demonstration of confidence and a gesture of consideration. Yes, and I think it will turn out to be a good move. If not, I shrugged. I poured and tossed another empty into my tomb. By the way, I said, I'm sorry.
What for?
I just noticed that I'm morbid and drunk and bitter, and I don't need that. He chuckled and clicked his glass against my own.
I know, he said. I know.
So we sat there while the moon fell till the last bottle was interred among its fellows. We talked for a time of days gone by. At length we fell silent, and my eyes drifted to the stars above Amber. It was good that we had come to this place, but now the city was calling me back. Knowing my thoughts, Ganelon rose and stretched, headed for the horses. I relieved myself beside my tomb and followed him. Chapter 5. The Grove of the Unicorn lies in Arden, to the southwest of Colvir. Near to that jutting place where the land begins its final descent into the valley called Garnath. While Garnath had been cursed, burned, invaded, and fought through in recent years, the adjacent highlands stood unmolested. The grove where Dad claimed to have seen the unicorn ages before, and to have experienced the peculiar events which led to his adopting the beast as the patron of Amber and placing it on his coat of arms, was, as near as we could tell, a spot now but slightly screened from the long view across Garnath to the sea. 20 or 30 paces in from the upper edge of things. Sorry, it's late. An asymmetrical glade where a small spring trickled from a mass of rock, formed a clear pool, brimmed into a tiny creek, and made its way off toward Garnath and on down. It was to this place that Gerard and I rode the following day, leaving at an hour that found us halfway down our trail from Colvir before the sun skipped flakes of light across the ocean, then cast its whole bucketful against the sky. Gerard drew rein as it was doing this. He dismounted then and motioned me to do the same. I did, leaving Star and the pack horse I was leading there beside his own huge piebald. I followed him off perhaps a dozen paces into a basin half filled with gravel. He halted, and I came up beside him. "What is it?" I asked. He turned and faced me with his eyes were narrow and his jaw clamped tight. He unfastened his cloak, folded it, and placed it on the ground. He unclapped his sword belt and lay it atop the cloak. "Get rid of your blade and your cloak," he said. "They will only get in the way." I don't remember what voice I gave Gerard the last time. I'm sorry I'm so inconsistent with these voices, man. I had an inkling of what was coming, and I decided I had better go along with it. I folded my cloak, placed the Jewel of Judgment beside Grey Swan Deer, and I faced him once again. I said only one word. "Why?" "It has been a long time," he said, "and you might have forgotten." He came at me slowly, and I got my arms out in front of me and backed away. He did not swing at me. I used to be faster than he was. We were both crouched, and he was making slow pawing movements with his left hand, his right hand nearer to his body, twitching slightly. If I had had to choose a place to fight with Gerard, this would not have been it. He, of course, was aware of this. If I had to fight with Gerard at all, I would not have chosen to do so with my hands. I'm better than Gerard with a blade or a quarterstaff. Anything that involved speed and strategy would give me a good chance to hit him occasionally while keeping him at bay, and would permit me to wear him down eventually and provide openings for heavier and heavier assaults. He, of course, was aware of this also, and that is why he had trapped me as he had. I understood Gerard, though, and I had to play by his rules now. I brushed his hand away a couple of times as he stepped up his movements, pressing nearer to me with every pace. Finally, I took a chance, ducked and swung. I landed a fast, hard left just a little above his middle. It would have broken a stout board or ruptured the insides of a lesser mortal. Unfortunately, time had not softened Gerard. I heard him grunt, but he blocked my right, got his right hand under my left arm, and caught my shoulder from behind. Sorry, I had to sneeze. I closed with him fast then, anticipating a shoulder lock I might not be able to break, and, turning, driving forward, catching his left shoulder in a similar fashion. I hooked my right leg behind his knee and was able to cast him backward to the ground. He maintained his grip, though, and I came down atop him. I released my own hold and was able to drive my right elbow into his left side as we hit. The angle was not ideal, and my left hand went up and across, reaching to grasp his right somewhere behind my head. I was able to duck out of it, but he still had my arm. For a moment, I had a clear shot at his groin with my right, but I restrained myself. It is not that I have any qualms about hitting a man below his belt, but I knew that if I did this to Gerard just then, his reflexes would probably cause him to break my shoulder. Instead, scraping my forearm on the gravel, I managed to twist my left arm up behind his head while at the same time sliding my right arm between his legs and catching him about the left thigh. I rolled back as I did this, attempting to straighten my legs as soon as my feet were beneath me. I wanted to raise him up off the ground and slam him down again, driving my shoulder into his middle for good measure. But Gerard scissored his legs and rolled to the left, forcing me to somersault across his body. I let go of my hold on his head and pulled my left arm free as I went over. I scrambled clockwise then, dragging my right arm away and going for a toe hold. But Gerard would have none of that. He had gotten his arms beneath him by then, and with one great heave he tore himself free and twisted his way back to his feet. I straightened myself and leaped backwards. He began moving toward me immediately, and I decided he was going to maul the hell out of me if I just kept grappling with him, and I had to take a few chances. I watched his feet, and in what I judged to be the best moment, I dove in beneath his extended arms just as he was shifting his weight forward onto his left foot and raising his right. I was able to catch hold of his right ankle and hoist it about 4 feet high behind him. He went over and down, forward and to his left. He scrambled to get to his feet, and I caught him on the jaw with a left that knocked him down again. He shook his head and blocked with his arms as he came up once more. I tried to kick him in the stomach, but missed as he pivoted, catching him on the hip. He maintained his balance and advanced again. I threw jabs at his face in circled. I caught him twice more in the stomach and danced away. He smiled. He knew I was afraid to close with him. I snapped a kick at his stomach and connected. His arms dropped sufficiently for me to chop him alongside the neck, just above the collarbone. At that moment, however, his arms shot forward and locked about my waist. I slammed his jaw with the heel of my hand, but it did not stop him from tightening his grip and raising me above the ground. Too late to hit him again. Those massive arms were already crushing my kidneys. I sought his carotids with my thumbs and squeezed, but he kept raising me back up over his head. My grip loosened, slipped away. Then he slammed me down on my back in the gravel, as peasant women do their laundry on the rocks. There were exploding points of light, and the world was a jittering, half-real place as he dragged me to my feet again. I saw his fist. The sunrise was lovely, but the angle was wrong, by about 90 degrees. Suddenly, I was assailed by vertigo. It canceled out the beginning awareness of a road map of pains that ran along my back and reached the big city somewhere in the vicinity of my chin. I was hanging high in the air. By turning my head slightly, I could see for a very great distance down. I felt a set of powerful clamps affixed to my body, shoulder and thigh. When I turned to look at them, I saw that they were hands. Twisting my neck even further, I saw that they were Gerard's hands. He was holding me at full arm's length above his head. He stood at the very edge of the trail, and I could see Garnath and the terminus of the Black Road far below. If he let go, part of me might join the bird droppings that smeared the cliff face, and the rest would come to resemble washed-up jellyfish I had known on beaches past. "Yes, look down, Corwin," he said, feeling me stir, glancing up, meeting my eyes. "All that I need to do is open my hands." "I hear you," I said softly, trying to figure out a way to drag him along with me if he decided to do it. "I'm not a clever man, but I had a thought, a terrible thought. This is the only way I know to do something about it. My thought was that you had been away from Amber for an awfully long while. I have no way of knowing whether the story about losing your memory is entirely true. You have come back and you have taken charge of things, but you do not yet truly rule here. I was troubled by the deaths of Benedict's servants, as I am now troubled by the death of Cain. But Eric has died recently also, and Benedict is maimed. It is not so easy to blame you for this part of things, but it has occurred to me that it might be possible. If it should be that you are secretly allied with our enemies of the Black Road." "I am not," I said. "It does not matter for what I have to say," he said. "Just hear me out. Things will go the way that they will go. If, during your long absence, you arrange this state of affairs, possibly even removing Dad and Brand as part of your design, then I see you as out to destroy all family resistance to your usurpation. Would I have delivered myself to Eric to be blinded and imprisoned if that were the case?" "Hear me out," he repeated. "You could easily have made mistakes that led to that, but it does not matter now. You may be as innocent as you say, or as guilty as possible. Look down, Corwin. That is all. Look down at the Black Road. Death is the limit of the distance you travel if that is your doing. I have shown you my strength once again, lest you have forgotten. I can kill you, Corwin. Do not even be certain that your blade will protect you, if I get my hands on you but once. And I will, to keep my promise. My promise is only that if you are guilty, I will kill you the moment I learn of it. Know also that my life is insured, Corwin, for it is linked now to your own." "What do you mean?" "All of the others are with us at this moment, via my trump, watching, listening. You cannot arrange my removal now without revealing your intentions to the entire family. That way, if I die forsworn, my promise can still be kept." "Now I get the point," I said. "And if someone else kills you, they remove me also. That leaves Julian, Benedict, Random, and the girls to man the barricades. Better and better for whoever it is. Whose idea was this, really?" "Mine! Mine alone!" he said, and I felt his grip tighten. His arms bend and grow tense. "You are just trying to confuse things, like you always do," he groaned. "Things didn't go bad till you came back. Damn it, Corwin, I think it's your fault." Then he hurled me into the air. "Not guilty, Gerard!" was all that I had time to shout. Then he caught me. A great shoulder-wrenching grab, and snatched me back from the precipice. He swung me in and round and set me on my feet. He walked off immediately, heading back to the gravelly area where we had fought. I followed him, and we collected our things. As he was clasping his big belt, he looked up at me and looked away again. "We'll not talk about it any more," he said. "All right?" I turned and walked back to the horses. We mounted and continued on down the trail. The spring made its small music in the grove. Higher now, the sun strung lines of light through the trees. There was still some dew on the ground. The sod that I had cut for Cain's grave was moist with it. I fetched the spade that I had packed and opened the grave. Without a word, Gerard helped me move the body onto a piece of sailcloth we had brought for that purpose. He folded it about him and closed it with big, loose stitches. "Corwin, look!" It was a whisper, and Gerard's hand closed on my elbow as he spoke. I followed the direction of his gaze and froze. Neither of us moved as we regarded the apparition. A soft, shimmering white encompassed it, as if it were covered with down rather than fur and maning. Its tiny cloven hooves were golden, as was the delicate whorled horn that rose from its narrow head. It stood atop one of the lesser rocks, nibbling at the lichen that grew there. Its eyes, when it raised them and looked in our direction, were a bright emerald green. It joined us in immobility for a pair of instants. Then it made a quick, nervous gesture with its front feet, pawing the air and striking the stone 3 times. And then it blurred and vanished like a snowflake, silently. Perhaps in the woods to our right. I rose and crossed to the stone. Gerard followed me. There, in the moss, I traced its tiny hoof marks. "Then we really did see it," Gerard said. "We saw something. Did you ever see it before?" "No. Did you?" I shook my head. "Julian claims he once saw it," he said, "in the distance. Says his hounds refused to give chase." It was beautiful. That long, silky tail, those shiny hooves. "Yes, Dad always took it as a good omen." "I'd like to myself." "Strange time for it to appear, all these years." I nodded again. Is there a special observance, it being our patron and all? Is there something that we should do?" "If there is, Dad never told me about it," I said. I patted the rock on which it had appeared. "If you herald some turn in our fortunes, if you bring us some measure of grace—" "Thanks, Unicorn," I said. "And even if you do not, thanks for the brightness of your company at a dark time." We went and drank from the spring then. We secured our grim parcel on the back of the 3rd horse. We led our mounts until we were away from the place, where, save for the water, things had become very still. Okay. Chapter 6. Life's incessant ceremonies leap everlasting. Humans spring eternal on hope's breast, and frying pans without fires are often far between. The sum of my long life's wisdom that evening, tendered in a spirit of creative anxiety, answered by random with a nod and a friendly obscenity. We were in the library, and I was seated on the edge of the big desk. Random occupied a chair to my right. Gerard stood at the other end of the room inspecting some weapons that hung on the wall. Or maybe it was Ryan's etching of the unicorn he was looking at. Whichever, along with ourselves, he was also ignoring Julian, who was slouched in an easy chair beside the display cases, right center, legs extended and crossed at the ankles, arms folded, staring down at his scaly boots. Fiona, 5'2", perhaps in height, green eyes fixed on Flora's own blue as they spoke, there beside the fireplace. Hair more than compensating for the vacant hearth, smoldering, reminded me, as always, of something from which the artist had just drawn back, setting aside his tools, questions slowly forming behind his smile. The place at the base of her throat, where his thumb had notched the collarbone, always drew my eyes as the mark of a master craftsman, especially when she raised her head, quizzical or imperious, to regard us taller others. She smiled faintly just then, doubtless aware of my gaze, an almost clairvoyant faculty, the acceptance of which had never deprived of its ability to disconcert. Luella, off in a corner, pretended to study a book, but had her back to the rest of us. Her green tresses bobbed a couple of inches above her dark collar. Whether her withdrawal involved animus, self-conscious in her alienation, or simple caution, I could never be certain. Probably something of all of these. Hers was not that familiar a presence in amber. And the fact that we constituted a collection of individuals rather than a group, a family, at a time when I wanted to achieve some over-identity, some will to cooperate, was what led to my observations and Random's acknowledgement. I felt a familiar presence, heard a "Hello, Corwin," and there was Deirdre, reaching toward me. I extended my hand, clasped her own, and raised it. She took a step forward, as if to the first strain of some formal dance, and moved close, facing me. For an instant, a grilled window had framed her head and shoulders, and a rich tapestry had adorned the wall to her left. Planned and posed, of course, still effective. She held my trump in her left hand. She smiled. The others glanced our way as she appeared, and she hit them all with that smile, like the Mona Lisa with a machine gun, turning slowly.
"Corwin," she said, kissing me briefly and withdrawing, "I fear I am early."
"Never," I replied, turning toward Random, who had just risen and who anticipated me by seconds.
"May I fetch you a drink, sister?"
he asked, taking her hand and nodding toward the sideboard.
"Why, yes, thank you."
And he led her off and poured her some wine, avoiding, or at least postponing, I suppose, her usual clash with Flora. At least, I assumed most of the old frictions were still alive as I remembered them. So, if it cost me her company for the moment, it also maintained the domestic tranquility index, which was important to me just then. Random could be good at such things when he wants to. I drummed the side of the desk with my fingertips. I rubbed my aching shoulder. I uncrossed and recrossed my legs. I debated lighting a cigarette. Suddenly, he was there. At the far end of the room, Gerard had turned to his left, said something, and extended his hand. An instant later, he was clasping the left and only hand of Benedict, the final member of our group. All right. The fact that Benedict had chosen to come in on Gerard's trump rather than mine was his way of expressing his feelings towards me. Was it also an indication of an alliance to keep me in check? It was at least calculated to make me wonder. Could it have been Benedict who had put Gerard up to our morning's exercise? Probably. At that moment, Julian rose to his feet, crossed the room, gave Benedict a word and a hand clasp. This activity attracted Luella. She turned, closing her book and laying it aside. Smiling then, she advanced and greeted Benedict, nodded to Julian, and said something to Gerard. The impromptu conference warmed and grew animated. All right again, and again. 4 and 3, and 2 in the middle. I waited, staring at the group across the room. We were all present, and I could have asked them for attention and proceeded with what I had in mind. However, it was too tempting. All of us could feel the tension, I knew. It was as if a pair of magnetic poles had suddenly been activated within the room. I was curious to see how all the filings would fall. Flora gave me one quick glance. I doubt that she had changed her mind overnight, unless, of course, there had been some new development. No, I felt confident that I had anticipated the next move. Nor was I incorrect. I overheard her mentioning thirst and a glass of wine. She turned part way and made a move in my direction, as if expecting Fiona to accompany her. She hesitated for a moment when this did not occur, suddenly became the focus of the entire company's attention, realized this fact, made a quick decision, smiled, and moved in my direction. "Corwin," she said, "I believe I would like a glass of wine." Without turning my head or removing my gaze from the tableau before me, I called back over my shoulder, "Random, pour Flora a glass of wine, would you?" "But of course," he replied, and I heard the necessary sounds. Flora nodded, unsmiled, and passed beyond me to the right. 4 and 4, leaving dear Fiona burning brightly in the middle of the room. Totally self-conscious and enjoying it, she immediately turned around toward the oval mirror with the dark, intricately carved frame, hanging in the space between the two nearest tiers of shelves. She proceeded to adjust a stray strand of hair in the vicinity of her left temple. Her movement produced a flash of green and silver among the red and gold geometries of the carpet, near to the place where her left foot had rested. I had simultaneous desires to curse and to smile. The errant bitch was playing games with us again. Always remarkable, though. Nothing had changed. Neither cursing nor smiling, I moved forward, as she had known that I would. But Julian, too, approached, and a trifle more quickly than I. He had been a bit nearer, may have spotted it a fraction of an instant sooner. He scooped it up and dangled it gently.
"Your bracelet, sister," he said pleasantly. "It seems to have forsaken your wrist, foolish thing. Here, allow me."
She extended her hand, giving him one of those lowered eyelash smiles, while he unfastened the chain of emeralds. Completing the business, he folded her hand within both of his own and began to turn back toward his corner, from whence the others were casting sidelong glances while attempting to seem locally occupied.
"I believe you would be amused by a witticism we were about to share," he began.
Her smile grew even more delightful as she disengaged her hand. "Thank you, Julian," she replied. "I am certain that when I hear it I will laugh. Last, as usual, I fear." She turned and took my arm. "I find that I feel a greater desire," she said, "for a glass of wine." So I took her back with me and saw her refreshed. 5 and 4. Julian, who dislikes showing strong feelings, reached a decision a few moments later and followed us over. He poured himself a glass, sipped from it, and studied me for 10 or 15 seconds, and then said,
"I believe we are all present now. When do you plan to proceed with whatever it is you have in mind?"
"I see no further reason to delay," I said, now that everyone has had his turn. I raised my voice and directed it across the room. "The time has come. Let us get comfortable." The time has come. Let us get comfortable. Sorry, I had to go get up and get a drink. The others drifted over. Chairs were dragged up and settled into. More wine was poured, and a minute later we had an audience. "Thank you," I said, when the final stirrings had subsided. "I have a number of things I would like to say, and some of them might even get said. The course of it all will depend on what goes before, and we will get into that right now. Random, tell them what you told me yesterday." "All right." I withdrew to the seat behind the desk, and Random moved to occupy the edge of it. I leaned back and listened again to the story of his communication with Brand and his attempt to rescue him. It was a condensed version, bereft of the speculations which had not really strayed from my consciousness since Random had put them there. And despite their omission, a tacit awareness of the implications was occurring within all the others. I knew that. It was the main reason I had wanted Random to speak first. Had I simply come out with an attempt to make a case for my suspicions, I would certainly I would almost certainly have been assumed to be engaged in the time-honored practice of directing attention away from myself. An act to be followed immediately by the separate, sharp, metallic clicks of minds snapping shut against me. This way, despite my thoughts that Random would say whatever I wanted, despite any thoughts that Random would say whatever I wanted him to say, they would hear him out, wondering the while. They would toy with the ideas, attempting to foresee the point of my having called the assembly in the first place. They would allow the time that would permit the premises to take root contingent upon later corroboration. And they would be wondering whether we could produce the evidence. I was wondering that same thing myself. While I waited and wondered, I watched the others. A fruitless yet inevitable exercise. Simple curiosity, more than suspicion even, required that I search those faces for reactions, clues, indications. The faces that I knew better than any others, to the limits of my understanding such things. And of course, they told me nothing. Perhaps it is true that you really only look at a person the first time you see him. And after that, you do a bit of quick mental shorthand each time you recognize them. My brain is lazy enough to give that its likelihood, using its abstracting powers in a presumption of regularity to avoid work whenever possible. This time I forced myself to see, though, and it still did not help. Julian maintained his slightly bored, slightly amused mask. Gerard appeared alternately surprised, angry, and wistful. Benedict just looked bleak and suspicious. Luella seemed as sad and inscrutable as ever. Deirdre looked distracted, Flora acquiescent, and Fiona was studying everyone else, myself included, assembling her own catalogue of reactions. The only thing that I could tell after some time was that Random was making an impression. While no one betrayed himself, I saw the boredom vanish, the old suspicion abate, and new suspicion come to life. Interest rose among my kin, fascination almost. Then everyone had questions, at first a few, and then a barrage. "Wait," I finally interrupted. "Let him finish, the whole thing. Some of these will answer themselves. Get the others afterward." There were nods and growls, and Random proceeded through to the real end. That is, he carried it on to our fight with the beastmen at Flora's, indicating that they were of the same ilk as the one who had slain Cain. Flora endorsed this part. Then, when the questions came, I watched them carefully. So long as they dealt with the matter of Random's story, they were all to the good. But I wanted to cut things short of speculation as to the possibility of one of us being behind it all. As soon as that came out, talk of me and the smell of red herrings would also drift in. This could lead to ugly words and the emergence of a mood I was not anxious to engender. Better to go for the proof first, and save on later recriminations, and corner the culprit right now if possible, and consolidate my position on the spot. So I watched and waited. When I felt that the vital moment had ticked its way too near, I stopped the clock. None of this discussion, this speculation, would be necessary, I said, if we had all the facts right now. And there may be a way to get them, right now, and that is why you are here. That did it. I had them, attentive, ready, maybe even willing. I propose we attempt to reach Brand and bring him home, I said, now.
How? Benedict asked me. The trumps. It has been tried, said Julian. He cannot be reached that way. No response. I was not referring to the ordinary usage, I said. I asked you all to bring a full set of trumps with you. I trust that you have them. There were nods. Good, I said. Let us shuffle out Brand's trump now. I propose that all 9 of us attempt to contact him simultaneously. An interesting thought, Benedict said. Yes, Julian agreed.
producing his deck and riffling through it.
Worth trying, at least. It may generate additional power. I do not really know.
I located Brand's trump. I waited until all the others had found it. Then, let us coordinate things, I said. Is everyone ready? 8 assents were spoken. Then go ahead. Try, now. I studied my card. Brand's features were similar to my own, but he was shorter and slenderer. His hair was like Fiona's. He wore a green riding suit. He rode a white horse. How long ago? How long ago was that, I wondered? Something of a dreamer, a mystic, a poet, Brand was always disillusioned or elated, cynical or wholly trusting. His feelings never seemed to find a middle ground. Manic-depressive is too facile a term for his complex character. Yet it might serve to indicate a direction of departure. Multitudes of qualifications lining the roadway thereafter. Pursuant to this state of affairs, I must admit that there are times when I found him so charming, considerate, and loyal that I valued him above all my other kin. Other times, however, he could be so bitter, sarcastic, and downright savage that I tried to avoid his company for fear that I might do him some harm. Summing up, the last time I had seen him had been one of the latter occasions, just a bit before Eric and I had had the falling out that led to my exile from Amber. And those were my thoughts and feelings as I studied his trump, reaching out to him with my mind, my will, offering the vacant place I sought him to fill. About me, the others shuffled their own memories and did the same. Slowly, the card took on a dream dust quality and acquired the illusion of depth. There followed the familiar blurring, with the sense of movement which heralds contact with the subject. The trump grew colder beneath my fingertips, and then things flowed and formed, achieving a sudden verity of vision, persistent, dramatic, full. He seemed to be in a cell. There was a stone wall behind him. There was straw on the floor. He was manacled, and his chain ran back through a huge ring bolt set in the wall above him and behind him. It was a fairly long chain, providing sufficient slack for movement. At the moment he was taking advantage of this fact, lying sprawled on a heap of straw and rags off in the corner. His hair and beard were quite long, his face thinner than I had ever before seen it. His clothes were tattered and filthy. He seemed to be sleeping. My mind went back to my own imprisonment. The smells, the cold, the wretched fare, the dampness, the loneliness, the madness that came and went. At least he still had his eyes, for they flickered, and I saw them when several of us spoke his name. Green they were, with a flat, vacant look. Was he drugged, or did he believe himself to be hallucinating? But suddenly his spirit returned. He raised himself. He extended his hand.
"Brothers," he said. "Sisters."
"I'm coming!" came a shout that shook the room. Gerard had leaped to his feet, knocking over his chair. He dashed across the room and snatched a great battle-axe from its pegs on the wall. He slung it at his wrist, holding the trump in the same hand. For a moment he froze, studying the card. Then he extended his free hand, and suddenly he was there, clasping Brand, who chose that moment to pass out again. The image wavered. The contact was broken. Cursing, I sought through the pack after Gerard's own trump. Several of the others seemed to be doing the same thing. Locating it, I moved for contact. Slowly, the melting, the turning, the reforming occurred. There! Gerard had drawn the chain taut across the stones of the wall and was attacking it with the axe. It was a heavy thing, however, and resisted his powerful blows for a long while. Eventually, several of the links were mashed and scarred. But by then he had been at it for almost 2 minutes, and the ringing, chopping sounds had alerted the jailers. For there were noises from the left, a rattling sound, the sliding of bolts, the creaking of hinges. Although my field of perception did not extend that far, it seemed obvious that the cell's door was being opened. Brand raised himself once more. Gerard continued to hack at the chain. "Gerard, the door!" I shouted. "I know," he bellowed, wrapping the chain around his arm and yanking it. It did not yield. Then he let go of the chain and swung the axe. As one of the horny-handed warriors rushed him, blade upraised, the swordsman fell, to be replaced by another. Then a third and a fourth crowded by them. Others were close on their heels. There was a blur of movement at that moment, and Random knelt within the tableau, his right hand clasped with Brand's, his left holding his chair before him like a shield, its legs pointing outward. He sprang to his feet and rushed the attackers, driving the chair like a battering ram amid them. They fell back. He raised the chair and swung it. One lay dead on the floor, felled by Gerard's axe. Another had drawn off to one side, clutching at the stump of his right arm. Random produced a dagger and left it in a nearby stomach, brained two more with the chair, and drove back the final man. Eerily, while this was going on, the dead man rose above the floor and slowly drifted upward, spilling and dripping the while. The one who had been stabbed collapsed to his knees, clutching at the blade. In the meantime, Gerard had taken hold of the chain with both hands. He braced one foot against the wall and commenced to pull. His shoulders rose as the great muscles tightened across his back. The chain held. 10 seconds, perhaps 15. Then, with a snap and a rattle, it parted. Gerard stumbled backward, catching himself with an outflung hand. He glanced back, apparently at Random, who was out of my line of sight at the moment. Seemingly satisfied, he turned away, stooped and raised Brand, who had fallen unconscious again, holding him in his arms. He turned and extended one hand from beneath the limp form. Random leaped back into sight beside them, then Zan's chair, and gestured to us also. All of us reached for them, and a moment later they stood amid us as we crowded around. A sort of cheer had gone up as we rushed to touch him, to see him, our brother who had been gone these many years, and just now snatched back from his mysterious captors. And at last, hopefully, finally, some answers might also have been liberated. Only he looked so weak, so thin, so pale. "Get back!" Gerard shouted. "I'm taking him to the couch. Then you can look all you—" Dead silence. For everyone had backed off, and then turned to stone. This was because there was blood on Brand, and it was dripping. And this was because there was a knife in his left side, to the rear. It had not been there moments before. Some one of us had just tried for his kidney and possibly succeeded. I was not heartened by the fact that the random Corwin conjecture that it was one of us behind it all had just received a significant boost. I had an instant during which to concentrate all my faculties in an attempt to mentally photograph everyone's position. Then the spell was broken. Gerard bore Brand to the couch, and we drew aside. And we all knew that we all realized not only what had happened, but what it implied. Gerard set Brand down in a prone position and tore away his filthy shirt. "Get me clean water to bathe him," he said, "and towels. Get me saline solution and glucose, and something to hang them from. Get me a whole medical kit." Deirdre and Flora moved toward the door. "My quarters are closest," said Random. "One of you will find a medical kit there, but the only IV stuff is on the lab on the 3rd floor. I'd better come and help." They departed together. We all had had medical training somewhere along the line, both here and abroad. That which we learned in Shadow, though, had to be modified in Amber. Most antibiotics from the Shadow worlds, for example, were ineffectual here. On the other hand, our personal immunological processes appear to behave differently from those of any other peoples we have studied, so that it is much more difficult for us to become infected, and if infected, we deal with it more expeditiously. Then, too, we possess profound regenerative abilities.
All of which is as it must be, of course. The ideal necessarily being superior to its shadows. And, Amberites that we are, and aware of these facts from an early age, all of us obtained medical training relatively early in life. Basically, despite what is often said about being your own physician, it goes back to our not unjustified distrust of virtually everyone, and most particularly of those who might hold our lives in their hands. All of which partly explains why I did not rush to shoulder Gerard aside and undertake Brand's treatment myself. Despite the fact that I had been through a med school on the Shadow Earth within the past couple of generations. The other part of the explanation is that Gerard was not letting anyone else near Brand. Julian and Fiona had both moved forward, apparently with the same thing in mind, only to encounter Gerard's left arm like a gate at a railway crossing. "No," he said. "I know that I did not do it, and that is all I know. There will be no second chance for anyone else." With any one of us sustaining that sort of wound while in an otherwise sound condition, I would say that if he made it through the first half hour, he would make it. Brand, though, the shape he was in, there was no telling. When the others returned with the materials and equipment, Gerard cleaned Brand, sutured the wound, and dressed it. He hooked up the IV, broke off the manacles with a hammer and chisel Random had located, covered Brand with a sheet and a blanket, and took his pulse again. "How is it?" I asked. "Weak," he said, and he drew up a chair and seated himself beside the couch. "Someone fetch me my plate and a glass of wine." I didn't have any. "Also, if there's any food left over there, I'm hungry." Luella headed for the sideboard, and Random got him his blade from the rack behind the door. "Are you just planning to camp there?" Random asked, passing him the weapon. "I am." "What about moving Brand to a better bed?" "He is all right where he is. I will decide when he can be moved. In the meantime, someone get a fire going, then put out a few of those candles." Random nodded. "I'll do it," he said. Then he picked up the knife Gerard had drawn from Brand's side, a thin stiletto, its blade about 7 inches in length. He held it across the palm of his hand. "Does anyone recognize this?" he asked.
"Not I," said Benedict. "Nor I," said Julian.
"No," I said. The girls shook their heads. Random studied it. "Easily concealed, up a sleeve, in a boot or bodice. I took real nerve to use it that way." "Desperation," I said. "And a very accurate anticipation of our mob scene. Inspired, almost."
"Could one of the guards have done it?" Julian asked. "Back in the cell?"
"No," Gerard said. "None of them came near enough." "It looks to be decently balanced for throwing," Deirdre said. "It is," said Random, shifting it about his fingertips. "Only none of them had a clear shot or the opportunity, I'm positive." Luella returned, bearing a tray containing slabs of meat, half a loaf of bread, a bottle of wine, and a goblet. I cleared a small table and set it beside Gerard's chair. As Luella deposited the tray, she asked, "But why? That only leaves us. Why would one of us want to do it?" I sighed. "Whose prisoner do you think he might have been?" I asked. "One of us? If he possessed knowledge which someone was willing to go to this length to suppress, then what do you think? The same reason also served to put him where he was and keep him there. Her brows tightened. "That does not make sense either. Why didn't they just kill him and be done with it?" I shrugged. "Must have had some use for him," I said. "But there is really only one person who can answer that question adequately. When you find him, ask him."
"Or her," Julian said. "Sister, you seem to be possessed of a superabundance of naivete, suddenly."
Her gaze locked with Julian's own, a pair of icebergs reflecting frigid infinities. As I recall, she said, you rose from your seat when they came through, turned to the left, rounded the desk, and stood slightly to Gerard's right. You leaned pretty far forward. I believe your hands were out of sight, below.
And as I recall, he said, you were within striking distance yourself, after Gerard's left and leaning forward.
I would have had to do it with my left hand, and I am right-handed.
Perhaps he owes what life he still possesses to that fact.
You seem awfully anxious, Julian, to find that it was someone else.
All right, I said, all right. You know that this is self-defeating. Only one of us did it, and this is not the way to smoke him out.
Or her, Julian added.
Gerard rose, towered, glared. I will not have you disturbing my patient, he said, and Random. You said you were going to see to the fire. Right away, Random said, and moved to do it. Let us adjourn to the sitting room off the main hall, I said, downstairs. Gerard, I will post a couple of guards outside the door here. No, Gerard said. I would rather that anyone who wishes to try it get this far. I will hand you his head in the morning. I nodded. Well, you can ring for anything you need. Or call one of us on the trumps. We will fill you in the morning on anything that we learn. Gerard seated himself, grunted, and began eating. Random got the fire going and extinguished some lights. Brand's blanket rose and fell, slowly but regularly. We filed quietly from the room and headed for the stairway, leaving them there together with the flare and the crackle, the tubes and the bottles. Whew, all right, man, that was a triple chapter right there. That'll be doing it for tonight. I wasn't sure if I was going to make it through that last one there. Thank God it was short. Ugh. My throat's killing me. Been a while since I've done one of those. I felt like I was stumbling more than usual. I feel like I say that every time. Probably because I don't read this aloud as regularly as I should to keep the skills crisp, I suppose. I felt like my pacing was a little bit fast in this one too, sometimes, especially near the end there. Which part of it was I was really strained on my throat, and so I was trying to get through it really fast. But anyhow, hopefully I'll be able to come back next week even faster. Instead of having another 2-week wait, I hope to be able to get one next week, next weekend, rather. We will have some stuff going on next weekend, so I'm not sure how much free time exactly I'll have, but I believe I should have enough to do another chapter reading, I hope. I'm not doing as much yard work as I have been, although it's been kind of rainy, so haven't really had a chance to. Anyhow, thanks for watching. I think near the end there, I finally kind of got all the voices settled into the characters. I kind of was forced to, with the big congregation there. Anyhow, I guess I'll see you guys next time.